Today's video is brought to you by Squarespace. And it's finally time more to take a look at the sculptors. So today we're gonna take a look at the 64, the 64S, the 78, and the 78S. So stay tuned. Now, before we jump into this review, I'd ask that you take a moment and hit the like and subscribe if you've enjoyed my past content. This is your first time with me, welcome. We do coffee stuff here. So let's get going with the video. I've had these grinders now for a couple of months or so, and people have been really pushing me to put out the review, but I wanted to take a lot of time, really season the grinders, get to know them really well, and put it out before the Kickstarter ends May 12th. Now, if you're seeing this in the future, these are production units, so this should stand the test of time until they come out with another iteration. What I have sitting here is the 064S, the 064, the 078 with espresso burrs in it. It's gonna be stepless, and this is the 078 with ghost burrs or turbo burrs in it, I apologize. This grinder I made a review of a few months ago right here, and I absolutely adored it. I bought this with my own money. This was released in some countries around the world in June of 2022, so I was able to secure one thanks to a friend giving me a heads up that they were shipping to Norway, so I just, put a VPN and somehow they shipped to me in Portugal. When they announced these as a Kickstarter, you all did an incredible job. Went onto their YouTube when they announced the video. I made a comment on there saying something like, I'd love to have early access to buying these. Hundreds of you went and liked the comment, and then dozens of you left comments below saying, send them these, send them these, send them these. They reached out to me and asked if I wanted these sent to me, so I agreed. Whenever I first was getting this, I initially reached out to them to see if I could buy it. They said, no, they're not shipping to Europe, but we can partner with you if you want to do something along those lines. I said, no, I'll just wait and find a way to buy it. Whenever you all, let your voice be heard, and I had the opportunity to get these for free, I definitely took them up on that. So there is gonna be inherent bias there. But I will be giving these away, so it's not like, it's fine. I'm not keeping them anyway. First things first, the look of these. Very contentious topic. I've had people say they look like sewing machines, which I know for some of you, you're gonna be like, I can't unsee that now. I think these look nice. I'll be honest, I cannot stand these opaque hoppers. I think it looks awful. Give me the transparent ones or whatever you wanna call this, because it's kind of like warped plastic, but I can't stand these at all. They're both actually stepless. Down here is a catch cup. Now this one feels actually pretty cheap. It's just like aluminum. It's very lightweight, and it doesn't feel that great in my hand. This one, however, which also is aluminum, but there's some sort of weighted base on it that just makes it feel more premium. There's a big difference in the feeling of these two. This one's heavy, this one's really light. This one, it feels like because it's so heavy, like whenever I push it onto the base, there is a magnet to self-center it, but like when I push it, it's not really intensely magnetic, so I'm not scared of scratches coming over time. This one is so light and the magnet's so powerful that when you do it, just watch this. Like, it's so powerful, I'm scared over time. If grounds get over it, you might get some scratches show up. That being said, I've had this for a while and I've put a ton of coffee through it and I've not gotten any scratches. And it is an anodized coating, should be fine, but that is something that I was thinking about is, maybe in a year, 2 years, it might get really scratched up. This grinder actually feels a little bit more robust and more well-built than this one, which is really odd to me because not only is it more than double the size motor, which should be a big hefty cost, but there are parts of it that just feel like they are made a lot more durably. Even the lids themselves just feel more durable. And this one, for whatever reason, they don't have the plastic cover that they had to put on this one. So I'm not sure I really understand the choice there. In the base itself, it's really solid, really heavy. In fact, the whole grinder itself is a pretty nice, substantial weight, especially when you get up to this one because it has quite a large motor. You have your on and off button here, which I'm torn on whether or not I like it because it's so big, but the entry is a pretty small entry into the machine. You have to kind of click it straight on. If you kind of click to the side, sometimes it doesn't really turn on. And well, this one's not plugged in. That was silly. Right there on the side, it is very sleek, which I do enjoy, but that was kind of something that could cause issue. On the back, you have variable RPM, a huge desire in the market without much objective evidence that it's actually doing much. But if you want to use it, that's great. On the 064s, they go from 800 to 1200 RPM. And you just turn the little dial and you can see the numbers over here. Now, that's not ideal if you're wanting to see every time you're grinding because, it might be against a wall or whatever as you're sitting there and you're just kind of blindly going unless you want to pull the grinder out and take a look and you're like, all right, let's see, I want it right at 1,000. Normally people have these against a wall, so it's mostly flying blind if you're wanting a specific RPM. I'll be honest, I just keep it at 1,200. Yeah, I don't know. On the big boy, those 7.8, you've got from 800 to 1,400, so a little bigger range. Now 1,400 is a common RPM for grinders. That's what the DF64 is at. That's what the Fellow Ode is at. That's what the Bentwood is at. I know a lot of you are like have this idea that lower RPM means less fines. There's no objective proof of that outside of some cone burrs. On the 64, we have a 180 watt. We'll rate it up to 180 watt. Numbers different in different places. 150, 180. When it comes to motor stuff, electrical stuff, it's a little complex. I would not like super worry about that when it comes to something like a brushless, because the longevity should be really robust on something like a brushless. And you know, as long as you know what you're doing with that much motor power, you should be fine. For instance, the new Niche Duo that's coming out only has a 130 watt motor, which is really weak. And my fear, I'll go and tell you, is longevity on it because 83 millimeter burrs. But it has more than enough torque, and it's because they used a step down gearbox in order to have like a 1:3 or 1:5 ratio on there, which really increases torque. They have a fail-safe mode that kicks on, and with really lightly roasted coffees, if you have it close to Burr Touch or an espresso range, I have experienced stalling with, for instance, Nomad coffees out of Barcelona. I put it on, you know, a pretty fine grind setting, and it would stall. And so what happens when it stalls is it has just like a beep noise. It stops grinding, as beep, because it doesn't want to hurt the motor. So there's a fail-safe built in on here. Now, I would say for the absolute majority of you out there, that you'll never run into this ever. And in fact, I guarantee the reason they didn't run into this in their testing, or I'm assuming they didn't, is because typically, especially in the Asian market, but you have a lot more darker roasted coffees that are used. And this is same with like Italian companies and other companies throughout Europe. They typically test with really dark coffees. And so you don't need nearly as much torque to chew through those. When it comes to the super dense coffees that might even have a little moisture content left in them, you need a lot more torque in order to rip through those. So on the 64s, I have a little pause with the motor. I'm going to be honest with you. I have a little pause when it comes to doing espresso and changing out to even more intense burr sets that take more torque in order to rip through, sort of like some of the SSP options. When you get down to espresso, it's going to be a little bit more difficult to rip through. Now, that being said, I've experienced more stalling with the S burrs than I have with SSP, and I think it's because the aggressive feed rate on these. You have a really deep dip on the entry for the beans on the S burrs in this grinder right here. So I think that is what's causing it, is it's a super fast feed rate. And what's interesting is it doesn't stall immediately. Even if you cold start, it'll grind for 5 or so seconds before it stalls, which tells me it's just overwhelming it with a fast feed rate. Now, the same cannot be said on the 78. These have 400 BLDC motors, which unless you put some sort of insane controller on it, should be able to rip through just about anything. I will say I did stall it with wet beans. I had some defective beans from a roaster they sent me that were really underdeveloped, and there was still a decent amount of moisture in it. Hand grinding it, you could kind of feel it because it was kind of smushing the beans. No one actually bruised that. This has chewed through everything without a problem, even at Burr Touch. Not an issue there. If some foreign object goes in, like a rock, your burrs are not going to try to chew through it. Right when it feels some sort of resistance that's more than typical for roasted coffee, it's going to give you that fail-safe beep. Whew, this is a long video, and you know, I think this is a better time than any to really talk about the sponsor of today's video, Squarespace. Squarespace is an awesome resource for creators like myself that are really wanting to integrate their social media to an online presence. I don't know how to code, I don't know how to write a website, and this gives you these dope templates in order to just beautifully make a website yourself. You can integrate a storefront there with easy access to everything that's very intuitive, and even a schmuck like me can kind of play around with it. I recommend checking out my link, which is www.squarespace.com/Lance Hedrick. Spell that name correctly. And if you're worried about the spelling, we have it on the screen for you and in the caption below. Are you a ceramicist? You can put your things online for sale. Are you a comedian? Guess what? Upload your videos, link your YouTube to it. I'm not a comedian because half my jokes fall flat, but it is okay because you are with me anyway. Once you're happy with your website and you want to make it live, feel free to use my code below. Try it for yourself. I think you're going to enjoy it if this is something that you're wanting to do to establish your online presence. Back to our exhaustive video. The S versions have stepless dials, and on the 64 it seems that the turbo also has stepless. On the bigger versions, the turbo one has stepped, and the steel burr or the espresso burrs have stepless. Now what you'll notice is as you're dialing, it will stop moving after. So when you have it to 0, it stops moving. It runs into a little bolt inside, and then when you go to all the way to the other end, it does the same thing. So it stops right there. And it's because on the inside, you have this little guy right here. Now this is a screw that goes all the way through, and there are two little bolts inside, two little screws inside. And whenever you go to one side, the edge of this hits that. And when you go to the other side, it's the same thing. So there are two little bits in here, and as it turns, it hits and it hits. All right. So the way that you calibrate is you just unscrew this and you can put it in whatever hole you want. And that's going to give you the different calibration. So if you want to switch your burrs out to maybe burrs that are a little thicker or burrs that are a little thinner, you're going to be able to recalibrate to those burrs without issue. I want to make sure you understand if you're buying one of these to rapidly switch burrs out, switching burrs is a pain in the bum. It is not as easy as a lot of other grinders. There's a lot of screws going in and there are really tight tolerances on the inside. And when you put it back together, sometimes you have to take it back apart and put it back together again, because if you do one little thing wrong, it messes everything up. So I'm going to take this apart real quick and you'll get kind of an idea of that. 6 hex screws that you need to take out, so you got to get the proper Allen wrench. So this is what you have going on. You have this faceplate, which is where you put the little screw on the inside of, and then you have a little rubber gasket around the edges, and that's going to give that friction to the outer knob right here. So when you put that on, that's what's giving it friction so that it holds on really nicely alongside this, and it keeps it sealed pretty well. Now we can take this little screw out. Now I'm going to kind of show you what it looks like when you get inside so that if you do end up getting this, you're not inside kind of flying blindly. Now this, as it spins, is actually pushing this little nub right here in the middle. This little bit is what's pushing the stationary or the fixed burr set, which is the one on the outside of this grinder. So as you twist it, you can kind of see that little nub moving just a little bit incrementally. All right. So what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to take off this wheel so you can kind of see what exactly is going on. But as you see, that little nub's going inside. And there we have it. So you see you have all these threadings inside so that it's really smooth and it won't drift. So you want to make sure if you take this out though, don't let grounds get in here. You want it to maintain that nice lubrication on the inside. But if you need to relube it, make sure you use a food safe type of lube. On the stepped version of this grinder, what you would be seeing right now is you would see little springed balls right here. All right, little like on like the tip of a ballpoint pen. You know how that kind of goes in and it rolls around? You would have 4 right here sticking out that would be attached to springs. And then on this piece right here, this faceplate, what you would have in this little ring is you'd have little divots for the holes to kind of fill. And that's where you're getting the stepped noises from. This is stepless, so it doesn't have that. This part detaches like so. So these are the 4 little quadrants that would have the spring-loaded balls inside, and it fits inside those 4 holes right there. So attaching it to this, there we go. So very simple attachment. So then we put it all back together, it's like so. Now we're gonna enter to the burr carriers themselves. So as you see, this is much different than a typical grinder. Now, obviously it's vertically mounted burrs, which isn't unusual, but what is unusual is the way that the burrs are mounted inside. It's very unique. So as you see, you have this big groove here, okay? You have a groove here, all right? So groove and groove. That means that whenever you're pulling this burr out, you gotta get this little clip type deal. You're going to push the burr in because it's spring loaded, right? You push it in and you're going to twist until those flaps are aligned, and then once you get it into the grooves, it should pull out. If it feels stuck, like a second ago, mine was stuck a little bit. If there's like a beam that didn't finish grinding stuck in the auger, then it can get caught in the threading in there, and then you're pulling against essentially a full beam. So you want to make sure that it's fully cleared out before you pull the burr out, or it could feel stuck, and you got to put a little, elbow grease in there. But this is what that burr looks like. This is the turbo burr. So as you see, it has 2 rows of teeth like a ghost burr, and then on the inside, it has cutting teeth just like on a flat burr, just like a typical flat burr. Then you have this robust auger that feeds the beans to the burrs themselves. Now, this is not a pre-breaker. In order for it to be a pre-breaker, the tolerances would need to be a lot tighter between this and the burrs on the grind chamber itself. You can actually see when you're grinding, you can see the beans are just being fed. They don't really cut up before hitting the burrs themselves. But it does control feed rate into the burrs themselves, which I think is a really nice thing. And one of the reasons I prefer vertically mounted flat burr grinders over horizontal ones, because you can kind of control that feed rate into the burrs themselves. As you see on the back here, you have these 2 little pieces. And now those fit inside the grooves here. So when you put them on, they rotate just like so. They have to fit inside of that though in order to kind of lock on. When you build it all back together, this is what it looks like. I can actually push that front burr up a little bit using the dialing system. So as I go finer, it's pushing it up just barely. All right, so it's pushing that front burr up. What's nice is you have this grooved axle, so instead of having to use a key like you normally would on axles that are smooth around the edges in order to lock in the front burr, the stationary burr, the rotating burr, whatever it is, it has this like star-like pattern that fits in perfectly inside of this. Okay, so that way it grabs it perfectly, and you don't have to worry about that little key warping or bending or anything like that. You got a spring inside. That should actually give you a longer life because it's pretty robust when it's this small. I would not recommend going past this. There's no real need to. The tolerances are nice and tight. It does a good job at the price point at maintaining alignment. If you wanted to get inside, do it at your own demise. It's not a good time switching burrs. I'll just be honest. I don't enjoy doing it. I don't want to have to do it. It's like, bleh. You do have to be really intentional on how you put everything. So let's not forget the spring. We'll put that first. And then as you see on the inside, again, you have these grooves you have to match up. So you have to make sure these flaps go into the proper area. So it needs to fit the grooves just like that. I'm going to take the clip, and you have to push until the spring is compressed and then turn to where those flaps are stuck behind the protruding parts. You're going to have to pay attention to how there's a wide flap here and a narrow flap on the bottom. And what you do there is you just align it with the wide flap and the narrow flap, just like so. Okay, and then what we're gonna do is we're gonna go through and put all those 6 screws back in. I'm not gonna take apart the 078, but it's the same process, except instead of just having 2 flaps, you have a more intense geometry there, but you have to make sure everything's lined up perfectly. On the top left part, you have 3 flaps. Bottom right, you have 1 flap that you just have to make sure they connect in. That actually helps you maintain your calibration, your alignment whenever you're taking it out, putting it back in. And the build up to this release, a lot of people were asking the TIMEMORE team, can you switch burrs, can you switch burrs, can you switch burrs? And they kept being very, very conservative in their response, saying we don't recommend it. All of their testing and their building of the motor was based off of their burr sets. So their measurement of tolerances, their measurement of alignment was all based off their burr sets. They're just being professional in their response so that if you do switch the burrs out, something happens to the motor. The alignment's not as good on your reassembly. Well, that was not our burr set. That doesn't mean you can't. It does mean, though, that they are not taking responsibility for something messing up if you do that.
I'm still going to do it whenever the heck I want, so feel free to join me.
Here we go. How do you make a tissue dance? Put a little boogie in it. Like a booger?
I know.
I didn't know if you knew the word booger. This one I've just been using for like 4 months, so it's well seasoned. This one I put a lot of coffee through because it's their espresso burrs and it's a bigger burr set. Put about 8 to 10 kilos through this one. These two I put about 5 kilos each through. I always like to have my friends use some of this equipment to see how intuitive it is. This one it was like stalling really badly and I couldn't understand it because this is the turbo burr one and we were at a coarse grind setting. Took the hopper off and I looked inside and I could see something was actually jammed in the auger, making it stop. And what it was very disheartening. This piece right here somehow detached inside here. It broke off though, and I've super glued it back, and it kind of worries me about potential build quality elsewhere when it comes to these plastics. Now, I also wanted to just go ahead and show you what the 78mm turbo burrs look like. Now, I showed it in my video reviewing the turbo, but I was just going to show you this again. And then the steel ones look like this. You're going to put pictures on the. I'll send you pictures of it, of these. I'll briefly touch on the fines collector once more because it still is my favorite way of dealing with retention and everything else. Well, after I put about 8 to 10 kilos through this grinder, I disassembled it and I took a brush and I scraped every crevice, every nook and cranny off in order to measure what was retained inside. And I got 0.18 grams. Astounding. Better than like any grinder I've ever rigorously tested. It's insane how little was left. It has that moving auger which pushes anything left through those burrs. There's not really any room in there for there to be retention because of how tight everything is inside. And then down here you have what they call the fines collector. Now when you twist it, what's happening is there's a thread and then the thread ends at the bottom. So as you're twisting it, there's a piece inside that's going down, and when the thread ends, it pops back up into place with a spring. So when it does that, it vibrates that whole little chamber, and any chaff, any fines, anything left on there is ejected into your cup. I don't use RDT. What I do for my espresso is I'll measure if I'm doing a 19-gram shot, I'll measure out 19.1, and without RDT, without any faffing around, just by using this clicker, I'll get out 19.02 or 19.03, something like that. Filter coffee using the turbo burrs, I will weigh out an extra 0.5 or 0.75 grams, and then I will grind it, and I won't use the knocker. Whatever this catches, which is mostly fines and chaff, I don't want that in my brew. Now, in espresso, I'm not as worried about it, but in a brew, there is a big difference in my opinion. So I get rid of that half a gram or however much it is. Obviously, the more coffee you grind, the more you're gonna have to overestimate that you're gonna lose. You have clickers on some, you have the button now for the option OP100, bellows, you have all these different things in order to get out the rest. This, all you gotta do is I need you to understand that I do hours and hours and hours of blind tasting off camera. I had some friends over and we did a pretty robust cupping. We first compared the 064, the 064S, and the 078S together. We had 2 to 3 people switching them up. So they would turn, I'd switch, then turn, switch. And we would do 3 cups of each and then mix them all together for 9 on the table. And we were trying to group them. And then we did cuppings with just groups that were blind as well. And across the board, the favorite unanimously, Turbo Burr on the 064. These two were much closer in cup profile. They were both fine. And to be honest, when we didn't test this together, but when I would do it against the Gen 02 Burrs, I actually preferred the Gen 02 Burrs to either cup profile of these two. I just found it more balanced, sweeter, and just more pleasant. This one was definitely the worst. This one was close to this cup profile. So that's how we first narrowed it down. Then we took this one and we did the 064 with the 078, the turbo, and Ode, the fellow Ode with SSP multi-purpose burrs. And when we did that, again, it was overwhelmingly unanimous and there was no misses on this at all in any of them. All chose the 078 as being by far superior. It had, and not only did it match the clarity of the SSPs in the fellow Ode, but it gave a more a more robust body. Then second best was without question the SSP, and then this one came pretty far in third. It actually tasted quite hollow and empty in comparison to those two burrs. So the 078 and the SSP multi-purpose burrs absolutely drowned filter coffee from these, and this one crushed these two, but when it went with the two big boys, it underperformed. Pulled a shot on each the 078S, the 064S, and the niche grinder, niche zero grinder. Let's just say I prefer dialing on the niche. Little changes yield big results, which to me just says that there's a smaller range for espresso than on something like the niche. On the niche, you have, essentially those 20 numbers that give you an espresso range. Obviously, it varies on the coffee, on the person, on the age of your grinder, etc. But on this, you have a pretty small range when it comes to espresso. Essentially, it's from 0 to about 3, depending on the style of coffee you're pulling. So the movements need to be really minute, and having stepless is really important. On the 064S, it's a similar range, but because it's a smaller circle, it's even less kind of, you have to go even smaller with your movements. So it's not that difficult because how weighted the knob is. So it's not like you're having to, use two hands to just barely movement, but it is a little less easy than the niche is, as far as how the niche has that big silver collar on it and just kind of barely turn it. I have to use bellows on my niche in order to get little to no retention. This one I'm able to just clicky, clicky, clicky. All right. Umesh Shiso James Hoffman spoon. So it's the 078S. Really good shot. It is vibrant. It's got like watermelon starburst kind of flavor in it. It's balanced really well. There's no real astringency on it. It was a well-pulled shot. Of course it was a well-pulled shot. Yeah, that's actually really nice. No, this is not another grinder. It's a massive cup of water. Stir. 064S. This one's a little bit more nougaty. The acidity is not as rounded. It has a little bit of a drying finish, and it's dialed in essentially the same way. It's still a really nice shot of espresso. I do enjoy it, but it's nowhere near as enjoyable as the 078S is. My testing off screen, these are actually quite similar in the cup. I did frequently prefer this in blind tastings, but this one can make a great shot without having to have that chalky finish or anything like that. That's not really inherent to this grinder. It's just whether or not you're pulling it in that way. That's a well-pulled shot on the niche. I'm getting more of a creamy texture out of these two, specifically the 064S, than I am off the niche. It is giving me a decent shot, though. I would say we're at like 60% of full throttle in this cup right here. We're sitting at like 70 or 80, and this one I think is hitting the coffee's full potential. Again, this is a one-off. This has nothing to do with everything I've done off, but it's quite consistent. These two I was consistently choosing over the niche zero, but that's just how it is. I love thick-bodied chocolatey shots. My favorite style of espresso machine is a lever style machine. I personally don't think the Niche Zero gives me the texture that a lot of even flat burr grinders have been able to give me. So I've brewed up 3 cups. This is the 078, the turbo burrs. This is the 064 turbo burrs, and this is the SSP multi-purpose burrs inside of Fellow O Gen 2. I have nothing written on the bottom of these, the number 2 on the bottom of these, the number 3 on the bottom of these. You scumbag, come switch them up.
You gotta stop calling me that.
Well, that's what you call all your fans on your YouTube.
My fans.
Emily's not really a scumbag. Emily calls her subscribers scumbags. I'm not actually calling her a scumbag. People, are they mixed?
Wow.
I just mixed them.
I know that. If you have misophonia, fast forward. All right.
You want me to mix them again?
No. What? So my guess is these are the 078, this is the SSP multipurpose, and this is the Ghost Burrs. These tasted like they had the least amount of stuff going on in it. It just tasted a bit, in comparison to the other two, it just tasted a bit more empty. This one, I think, tasted like it had a little bit more, going on. It was a little thinner in the body though, and it wasn't really expressing itself in like a full balanced way that this does. And again, the word, I hate this word, but it's the most apt word to describe filter from this. They taste the most juicy. Yep, that's 0, so that's the 078. Yep, that's nothing, so that's 078. All right, well, at least I got that right, so that's all I really care about. All right, so this is 2, so that's... Grab all this 2. The number 2 on the bottom of these, the number 3 on the bottom of these. This is the 064 Turbo Burst, and this is the SSP multi-purpose burst inside of Fellow O Gen 2. Y'all will remember though. Whatever 2 is, these are 2, these are 3. So I don't know which is which. This was my favorite, without question. It was the easiest, it was the best.
Let's go to wrap up.
If I were to buy one of these with my own money, I'm going straight up for the 078. There's no question. The Turbo Burrs in this, it's just some of the best coffee I've gotten, genuinely. And again, this is the one I paid for with my own money. The coffee in this is good. You can't really switch out the burrs, which is kind of lame because the burrs create good espresso. I would much prefer, honestly, getting something and putting in 64 millimeter burrs or 83 or 80 or something like that. At its price point, it's great. I personally would like probably a different set of burrs in there. The burrs are good. Do I still think it is a better value than the Niche? Yes, personally I do. They crushed it with this set. I think they did well with these sets. I think I would prefer getting the 83 millimeter SSP high uniformities in something like a DF83. Now with the 64 mils, they are fantastic for filter. The motor actually does have me a little worried, not even really the stalling portion. If you do medium or dark, you're golden with both espresso and filter. But when you're doing lighter coffees, there is a struggle going through. So not only do I recommend the highest RPM on here, but I would recommend like a slower trickle of coffee in. You don't want to overwhelm it. I'm just being overly cautious because I know a lot of you really like lightly roasted coffees. I know the majority do not, which is absolutely fine. I still think if you got this for the insane initial Kickstarter deal, then it's a no-brainer. If you're paying full price, it's a little bit different for me. Because I have not done a review on this yet, but I do have the DF64V, and that one seems like it's built to the same specs, or if not a little higher, and the motor is a little bit stronger. And we'll just see how that pans out. I'm not going to speak too soon on that. I don't want to give you FOMO because FOMO doesn't help anyone. So I've got about 20 grams of coffee here. We're going to dump it in, do a cold start, and you're going to be able to hear this is at 1200 RPM, so at the highest RPM, but listen to the motor. You can kind of hear little dips in the power as it's going through the coffee, which again is not a big deal, but that will affect particle distribution. This isn't even the lightest coffee I have, and you're already hearing some of those undulations, some of those dips, which when you don't have constant RPM, it will affect it, honestly. It's hard as a reviewer when I know of all these products coming out. I don't want every week to be like, this is better, this is better, this is better. So I have to take into account what I know. And so it's just difficult. I'm trying to give you the best information as possible with my knowledge, with my experience. Thank you so much for watching. I'm very sweaty now because of all this. Thank you for Squarespace sponsoring the video. Thanks for bearing with me. Hit the like, subscribe, all that good stuff. And I hope that you brew something tasty today. Cheers.